kindergarten. I only have two clear memories about kindergarten. Number one, nap time. I was lying on this cold, uncomfortable blanket on a cold linoleum floor. I was just terribly uncomfortable, and I was looking around thinking, I'm full of energy. I don't want to be sitting here. Sleep is not coming my way. I had to get up and moving, but I couldn't. I remember lying down looking at the other kids and thinking, this is taking forever. And that's it. That's all there is to that memory. But it came back many times in my life, and I think, well, it must be sort of profound to have a memory like that. And I thought about it after a while and finally figured out, I think it was the first time that I was actually breaking the boundary between being an innocent child and an autonomous human being. I think it was about control and authority. I clearly did not want to do what the adults in the room wanted me to do, and it was silly of them to think that I should. That's memory number one. Memory number two. The boys are screaming and fighting and pulling and doing all the stuff that boys do. They have to be first, But Bradley's pushing Tommy. Jason is grabbing something that Sammy's clutching to his chest. They're just always arguing, fighting, and have to be number one. Got to be the winner. Got to be the best. I don't get it. I find them boring and obnoxious. I have nothing to do with them. But the thing is, I don't really identify with the girls either, except they got the cool stuff on their side of the room. They got the paint, they got the crayons, they got the modeling clay. They even had that little kitchen, that little fake wooden painted food in the refrigerator. I dug all that stuff, but I didn't really feel like a girl. I didn't feel like a boy. I guess I was some kind of other, And at home, it wasn't much different. My older brothers, they were just like the boys, always fighting, always arguing. I had nothing to do with them. My parents, they were alcoholics. They had little to do with us. Yeah. When I got older and I turned 40 and I came out, I thought, aha, I found my people, my tribe. I'll never feel other again. But that wasn't the case. Turns out my otherness is really not related to my sexuality, my gender, any of that. It's more about my creative nature. My need to see things not as they are, but as they could be. My need to help others, question authority, question assumptions, to move out of their comfort zone. Now, as an adult, probably like most of you, I've had to actively seek out people who are somewhat like myself. It's not always easy, but when you find someone, it's like a homecoming, You find someone who loves ideas, who loves to play with them, has an intense curiosity. And for me, someone who, we really have a difficult time with people who toe the line without question. And that's something that I really, really admire about the gay community, is we are people who have come to the point in our life, we've questioned assumptions and questioned social norms to the point where we identify as queer. And it doesn't matter if you're gay or lesbian or bi or trans, any of it. It doesn't matter. It's amazing. Now, several members of my immediate family, my extended family, and friends identify as trans. One of my friends, Darlene, when she was in junior high school, she developed a rather substantial set of breasts. Yeah, look, she was stacked, right? Anyway, she noticed that the curve in her arm was a little different from the boys. She noticed that her skin had become soft and supple. And she had all the emotions and the feelings that you would associate with being a teenage girl. The thing is that Darlene had been born with a penis, and therefore had been identified as male and named Darren. But as Darren sat there in that locker room changing clothes with the boys, he realized that although he was hung, he had always felt like a woman or a girl. And so, with that large set of breasts and those feelings, Darren decided that she was Darlene. Can you imagine, in middle school, making that decision in your head? Wow. Now that's some kind of other. One of my kids identifies as being trans. He goes by the pronouns they, them, and their. And I'm really proud of all the choices that they've made, who they've become. But as I've embraced them embracing their otherness, it made me really think about mine in a new way. And I thought, well, I don't feel like a boy. I don't feel, maybe I'm trans in some way, But nah, that wasn't it. But it still stirred everything up. And I began thinking about it. And finally, it hit me, and probably most of you, good Lord, it's probably hit you way long ago than it did me. I'm kind of slow to the punch here. But I finally realized that when I was just that little kid in kindergarten, I didn't feel like one of the boys, I didn't feel like one of the girls, I felt sort of other, that subconsciously I had translated that to be that I was less than. Less than. Simply because of who I was. What a horrible thing. Now, before we go any further, I also know that I'm a white male. And look at me, I'm about as white as they come. So, my otherness compared to what women, people of color, people with so-called disabilities, how they're treated on a regular basis and how they're looked at is very different. My otherness is still real, but I do want to keep this in some kind of perspective. Now, tonight I'm going to be sharing some stories with you about otherness, about how we sort of feel other, think in other ways, do things other than what people expect of us. Now, all the stories are might seem mundane, but they all do relate to this otherness. For example, there are some people who think following rules and regulations is just the greatest thing in the world. They think that they're almost akin to the stairway to heaven. Boy, and don't they love it when they have control over others. 1995, I received a letter from the IRS telling me that I'm going to be audited from taxes I had filed 3 years prior. Now, at the time, my daughter Amy had been living with me, so I had deducted some expenses related to that. I also had an art studio in my apartment, so I had deducted some expenses related to that. Now, I only made about $22,000 a year. I didn't have enough money to pay all my bills. I had several part-time jobs, so I really didn't take this thing that seriously. I mean, I drove a series of cars for a while that were just junk cars, So I didn't know. I just didn't think much about it, right? Well, the day of the audit, I arrived in my 1983 Chevy Chevette. Although I used to call it my Chevy Shove-It, because every time I wanted to start the car, I had to get inside, release the emergency brake, put it into neutral, get back out, hold the door, the hood, and shove it down the road until I could jump back in, pop the clutch, and start the engine. Suffice it to say, it was a piece of crap. The only place to park that day was next to an almost brand new looking Lincoln Continental. The waiting room. A tall, stern-looking woman comes out and calls my name. Hi, I'm Ellen Stout. Follow me. And we start marching down the hall. As we pass what looks like a break room, she goes, oh, do you need anything to drink? But she keeps going. I'm okay. We get to her office. Now, I notice she has a window that's looking out over the parking lot. And I think to myself, all right, maybe I can lighten the mood right away, right? So I go over to the window. I motion for Ellen. Ellen, do you see that Lincoln Continental over there? Now, do you see that little brown piece of crap next to it? That's my car. Ellen, I think you're auditing the wrong person. She looks me dead in the eye. I'll be the judge of that now, won't I? Wow, it was icy cold. I'll be the judge of that. And for the next 2 hours, she took me on this house of horror ride, where she basically accused me of purposely trying to cheat the United States government. Oh, when it came to art supplies, she said, oh, did you have any tubes of paint that were left over at the end of the year? Well, yes, Ellen, I'm sure I did. Did you have any canvases you painted, but you hadn't sold? Well, of course, Ellen. Of course I did. Well, you can't deduct the paint that's on those canvases or in those tubes. What? I'm just saying, how do you measure that? And then I thought, you know what? I told her, I said, Ellen, I run my business on a cash basis, not accrual, and there's a difference. I can deduct all those expenses. And that's when I realized she didn't know what she was doing. She'd probably only audited big company, corporations. She'd never done this with an artist before. Oh, her response to me saying, oh, and this is a cash basis, was, well, I'll look into that. Now your daughter, how do I know she ate any of the food that you say you bought? What? Did you keep the receipts? Ellen, even if I kept the receipts, how does that prove that she ate the food? Come on. Ellen, you know this is getting to be ridiculous. She did not like that. At one point, she pulls a form out that apparently I had filed. She says, oh, did you read the fine print? And I said, well, Ellen, to be honest, I probably didn't. What's it say? Well, how should I know? I've never read it. But I don't have to. Oh. When she was done She said, oh, looks to me like you have an error of $200 here. $200? That's what this is all about? Now look, $200 isn't nothing, and back then especially, but still. I thought I could probably fight her on this because I don't think she knew what she was doing. But let me tell you something, she wore me out. So I signed on the dotted line. And that was that, right? Hold on. When Ellen was done with fees, fines, and penalties, she turned that $200 error into a $2,500 debt. It's unbelievable. You know, I like to think that if human beings lined themselves up on the color wheel, I would be found in the brightish, yellowish, goldish places. Ellen Stout, I think we'd find her in the grayish, greenish, baby shit brown. She just had no compassion for the human beings she was dealing with. Just rules and regulations. So when I got home, I realized I only had one recourse, and that was to write that story down and to write this song. She came down the hall, her long arms stretched out. Ah, there you are, she said. I'm Ellen Stout. Need anything to drink, anything at all to eat. Just turn your head and cough while I examine your receipts. My name is Ellen Stout, IRS. Now, is this really your correct address? And have you filed the form 1040 SLEZ? And read the fine print? Well, of course you haven't, neither have we. I don't care if you just got divorced. It doesn't matter here, compassion has no force. If I accuse you, as I am prone to do, the burden of proof will rest entirely on you. My name is Ellen Stout, IRS. Now don't blame me, I didn't start this mess. But since the system's here and I need the work, I'll find a thing or two behind which shadows lurk. I look for shadows, for they reveal distorted images of what is real. And from these images, I deduce just who's lying and who tells the truth. My name is Ellen Stout, IRS. Now, if the truth be told, I must confess, my favorite form, it's business loss or gain. For it is there I can induce most pain. My name is Ellen Stout, IRS. Now, is this really your correct address? And have you filed the form 1040 SLEZ? And read the fine print? Well, of course you haven't, neither have we. Thank you. Now you think it's all over then, right? Oh no, 3 years go by. I have finally paid the debt off. I received another letter from the IRS. I look at it and I think, oh, it's a bill. It's probably one of those bills for like $1.97 or something like that, you know, interest passing in the time. Oh no. It was a bill for a substantial amount of money. It wasn't a bill for $50, $500, not even a bill for $5,000. It was a bill for $50 billion, $50,310. It was unbelievable. The thing is, it went through the system. Nobody caught it. And a person maybe at that time was making $25,000, $26,000 a year. That's an awful lot. Well, you know, it was easy enough to clear that up. But just the fact, you know, that nobody caught it's unbelievable. Now, another large corporation I dealt with recently was, and this was just last year, was Verizon. I had chosen to go paper-free billing. About a week later, I got a letter from IRS, or from Verizon. Dear Chris, thank you for using paper-free billing. I received another letter. Dear Chris, thank you for choosing paper-free billing. Thank you for choosing. I got 6 letters from Verizon thanking me for going paper-free. I called them up finally. The customer service person was fantastic. They apologized, I'll take care of this, great. So a week goes by, everything's fine, and then a letter comes. Dear Chris, thank you for choosing paper-free billing. Another letter. Thank you for choosing paper-free billing. I got 12 letters from them thanking me for going paper-free. It's just ridiculous. And look, I know whoever worked at Verizon was working on this, whether it was them or a computer, they were just doing what they were programmed to do. They were doing like Ellen Stout, following rules and regulations. And see, the thing is, I'm not a guy who always likes rules and regulations. Well, because they don't always make sense. Now look, I am a person who likes the rules of the road. I believe in them, they stop us from having disaster, right? But a lot of times rules just get in the way. And I know that originally they probably were there designed for a good purpose. But after, if they're not valid anymore, then they should be broke, they should be just stopped or gotten rid of or adapted or something. Well, for example, to be accepted into the School of Art at East Carolina University, an applicant has to have 3 letters of recommendation, a portfolio, and a letter that you submit talking about your experience in art, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I had none of the above, but I wanted desperately to become an art major. So I wanted to switch from education. So I went to see the dean. Now at the time, I was in the School of Art Education, and I was really disappointed in most of the education courses. Most of that was because a lot of the teachers that were teaching teachers had either never been in classrooms or they had very little experience. But I'll tell you, the absolute worst experience I had was a professor who had a lecture, or whatever you call it, on why not to lecture in class. So I go to the thing, everybody's sitting in the thing, and he goes on and he starts talking, and he lectures for 15 minutes on why not to lecture in class. And I'm thinking, this is just insane. And everybody in the room's bored. But then I think, oh my God, this guy's brilliant. He's going to stop any moment. He's going to say, yeah, there, see how bored you are? This is why you don't lecture in class. He continued to lecture. After half an hour, I got up and I left the room. The next day, I asked friends of mine that had been in the thing, they'd stayed. He lectured for 90 minutes on why not to lecture in class. That's just insane. Well, I dropped out of school shortly after that. But I came back 3 years later, fully intent on getting my degree in education. Until, I was still disappointed with the courses, until I got this class. It was a required elective in art, and I chose photography. My God, I'd never been in a darkroom before. It was fantastic. To be in a darkroom, to have this piece of white paper, this developing fluid, to slowly turn from white to silvery to grayish and black and white, and this place that I had just been was there on that piece of paper. It was unbelievable. It was like magic. I was sold. I was going to switch majors. Right then I decided from education to art. So I took a breath and I went to see the dean. He was a personable sort of fella. He was nice, friendly, talked, Southern boy. We chatted for a little bit. Finally, it comes down to, he asked me about my portfolio and my letters of recommendation and my experience, and I had to tell him that I had none of the above. Well, he was not impressed. But I asked him if I could tell him why I wanted to become an art major. He thought about it a bit, and he finally said, all right, talk to me. So I told him the story I just told you about being bored with education courses and about my, experience in the darkroom. And something in that simple story clicked. Because I swear, I saw a flash of recognition go behind his eyes or something. But when I was done with my story, he stood up, he shook my hand, he said, welcome to the School of Art. Just like that. No portfolio, no experience, no letter of recommendation. Welcome to the School of Art. It's really interesting though. So I did switch majors. I got my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. But years later, what do? I become a teacher. But I didn't get there through the normal ways. I got there my way. I got there through getting a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, and then I had some education courses. And I didn't teach art. I taught gifted and talented kids in Maine public schools for 30 years. It was a wonderful time. And I think that maybe the fact that I get to things in a roundabout way, in another way, is one of the reasons I was able to work with kids so well, that were different, odd kids who just processed information and did things in different ways. One of my favorite types of learners is a kinesthetic learner. In essence, a kinesthetic learner is someone who, they have to be physically involved in the process of learning to really get it. Hands. Hands. That's the first thing I think of when Caleb comes to mind. It was as if a pair of hands had entered the room. Now, eventually, they were followed by this, lanky, charming 14-year-old boy with just a wink of mischief in his eye. Caleb, he was no scholar. He struggled with the written language and with the language of numbers on a daily basis. So, he was never considered to be one of the brighter boys. Certainly not gifted. But let me tell you something. His hands, his hands knew a language. His body knows, and he knows the world through his body. Well, about a year before I met Caleb, I was living and working down in Mount Desert Island, and I had taken this teacher's workshop on Lego robotics. In the hour-and-a-half session, we worked in pairs to build and operate a simple robot. We were given a little kit that had all the parts we needed, and it had a little booklet that was just composed of pictures. Well, in an hour or so, we built our robot, and then we downloaded a program to instruct it to move around the floor, and then if it came in contact with anything, it would stop, it would back up, it would turn 90 degrees, and then continue a little loop. Just like a Roomba, right? But we made that ourselves. To have that happen, to watch it was just incredible. I left that workshop feeling like an engineer. I was so excited that when I got back to my school, I convinced my principal to order several of the Lego robotics kits. I wanted to include them in my, my gifted and talented program. I remember the day the kits came. Oh my God, I opened them up on this table, and I'm looking down at these hundreds and hundreds of Lego mechanical parts. And my days of feeling like an engineer had come to an abrupt halt. I had no idea what these things were, what they're supposed to do, how they work together. Oh, it was so frustrating. But then I thought, I didn't get these for me. I got these because I sensed there were kids this would work for. And Caleb, he was proof of that. Now, Caleb had come to my attention because a fellow teacher in Brewer, Ted, he was a great English language arts teacher. He had recommended Caleb. Now, he knew of Caleb's weaknesses academically, but he also, when he heard that I was looking for kids to work in robotics, Caleb was the #1 kid he thought of. The other teachers recommended Emily and Adam. Emily, very charming, very bright, although a little nerdy 7th grader. Adam, a very bright and academically bright 8th grader. Emily was one of those kids who, gosh, she just excelled in everything. Language, arts, math, science, art, sports, anything she touched, she was golden. And, she's truly a gifted young girl. Well, whereas Emily and Adam came from upper middle class families, Caleb, he lived in a dilapidated house. It looked like it was one winter storm from falling flat. He lived there with his grandmother, who was bedbound. As far as other adults, as far as I understood, they came and went as they pleased. Well, at first I thought, this may not be a great mix of these kids. But it was Caleb who understood gear ratio. Oh, not intellectually. He didn't understand it mathematically. But with his hands, he knew that a small gear, turning a large gear, would decrease the speed and increase the power. When Caleb looked down at those hundreds and hundreds of parts, he knew instinctively what they were, how they worked together, and he could adapt them to other uses. Man, it was a joy to watch him work. It was a joy to watch all of them work. Well, about a couple of weeks after we started working together, I heard about a thing called the Maine Robot Track Meet. It was going to be held down in Castine, about an hour south of Brewer. So I thought about it, and I told the kids, I said, hey, we could go down, and see what's going on, and we won't compete, we just observe. And if we like what's going on, maybe we can compete next year. Absolute silence for the kids. They looked at me like I had two heads or something. Finally, Caleb. No way, Mr. Newcomb. We're not going down there. Not as observers. We go, we compete. Adam and Emily, 100% with it. Me? I felt totally inadequate. I thought, I'm going to fail them as their coach. They're going to fail at the event, and they'll never want to have anything to do with robotics again. But I did as they suggested. and I registered us as the Brewer, Maine robotics team. God, I had no idea what we were getting into. Well, there were 6 events, and our team chose to do 2 things. Adam and Caleb decided to do a thing called the strongest robot. And the strongest robot had to pull a series of weights starting at 40 pounds, 1 meter in less than a minute. Right? Remember, we're talking about these tiny little Legos, right? Like one thing. Emily chose to do a thing called the tabletop clearing robot. This is a robot that sat on a table, and there were 8 empty soda cans, and it had to get rid of, knock all 8 of those cans off the table in 90 seconds without it falling off in the process. Well, at first, I had no clue how to help him. So I just sort of sat back and watched. Well, it proved to be an excellent plan. They were incredible. They were terrific in their no-fear approach, you know? But where I could help them was when they got stuck in their thinking. Then I could help them say, oh, let's step back from this, let's go over here, let's look at it from this angle. Then they'd approach it from there and bang, they'd have a new solution. Well, about a week before the event, Caleb and Adam had their robot, and it was pulling 45 pounds, 1 meter in 1 minute. Now, I had watched them work and what they had to do. I thought that was a pretty incredible thing. Emily, on the other hand, she had devised a robot that actually worked within the 90 seconds. What it would do is it had a big scoop on the front, and it would just go forward and knock anything in its path off until it had a light sensor that sensed the edge of the table. It would back up, turn 45 degrees, and continue around the table. I like the room, by the way. It worked wonderfully, but it took 90 seconds, maybe 91, sometimes maybe 89. But it took the whole time. Well, the day of the event, we go down, we take a bus down. Emily and Adam's families meet us there. No one from Caleb's family shows. There's 8 teams, schools competing. So there's all these middle school kids from the teams, and then all their siblings are running around the gym like it's just a playground. There's Legos everywhere. But we had about 45 minutes where we could register, go through, see other robots, and then actually test ours out on the actual meet platform. And I gotta say, it was very humbling to watch other teams pull more weight than ours very fast, faster than ours too. And it was humbling to watch other teams do that same thing that Emily's did, but you do it faster. Well, in the end, Caleb and Adam's, but what happened is Caleb would look at these other robots and then he'd go back to the table. So, in the end, they pulled 55 pounds, 1 meter, in less than a minute. It was fantastic. But it wasn't the winner. The one who took first place trophy pulled 70 pounds. These tiny little Legos, they pulled 70 pounds. Emily's, it didn't win. It was great, but it couldn't go fast enough. The other ones are much faster than hers. But she didn't have a single bit of disappointment. She was so excited. They all were. Well, the last event of the day was a thing called the fastest robot. And Caleb said, hey, can we get in on that? And so I asked Tom Bickford, the director, and he said, sure. So in just a matter of minutes, Caleb redesigns their strongest robot and turns it into the fastest robot. God, that thing was fast. It was just zooming down the floor. The crowd was loving it. It was faster than any other robot. They're just cheering it on. But it had this tendency to just veer off to the left a little bit. And so just before the finish line, boom, it was disqualified. There was an audible sigh in the crowd. Well, afterwards, Tom Bickford took us aside and told me and Caleb that, it wasn't his design. It's that the Lego motors weren't in sync. Who'd have known? So, anyway, on the ride back in the bus, not a shred of disappointment. No. All they did was sit in the back of the bus talking about what they'd learned and what they were going to do next year. It was fantastic. I want to read this quote to you. It says, could it be, this is from Thomas G. West in his book, In the Mind's Eye. Could it be that some of those with the greatest potential for being the great inventors, mathematicians, and scientists are to be found among those who are repairing cars, attending art schools, driving trucks, or buried unnoticed deep inside some corporate or government bureaucracy? Those who learn with great difficulty in one setting may learn with surprising ease in another. I wish they taught us that stuff in school. We were our age anyway. It's better now. But anyway, after that meager sort of start in robotics, I developed an after-school program in Brewer and in Raymond. And one of the things I did that I really loved after working with Caleb was I got rid of the criteria of having to be either a gifted and talented student or having a teacher recommend you. The only thing a student had to do was just show interest. And in that way, I not only got gifted and talented kids, I got a lot of special ed kids, I got a lot of kids who, just like Caleb, had an intuitive way of working. I remember this one 7th grader, Colby, up in Raymond. You know, he was a special ed student, but he had some anger issues. And apparently he had actually started some fights, physical fights with not only students, but with some teachers. So he had an ed tech who was assigned to be with him all day long, just in case he lost it. Well, when the administration heard that Colby wanted to be in my robotics program after school, they demanded that an ed tech stay after school and be with him. All right, that's fine. I remember the first day Colby comes in. He comes in the room, he sees the tables with all the Legos all over the table. He just beelines to his table. He just starts building. Colby is not someone who's going to wait around for instruction, you know? And at the end of that first session, good Lord, he had built one of the most interesting, intriguing vehicles I had ever seen. And by this time, I'd been doing this for a decade or more. You know, and then I realized that there was no trouble. He wasn't having any trouble with anybody. So I told the ed tech he didn't really need to come anymore. So he stopped coming. And we never had any problems. And look, it wasn't because of me. It was because Caleb was involved in something that he enjoyed and that he could see success in. And let me tell you something. Success in school was not something that Colby experienced on a regular basis. Oh, and that year, at the Maine Robot Track Meet, Colby's tabletop cleaner robot took first place. And had there been a trophy, had there been a trophy for the best looking robot, he would have gotten that too. But he'd also worked with another team member and they entered the steeplechase event and they took the first place trophy in that. And Monday morning, when the principal was announcing that Colby had brought, that he brought 2 first place trophies from the mini robot track meet. Yeah. So, like I say, all my teams always had gifted and talented and students like Colby and Caleb. Colby who just needed to be involved physically. Caleb, who really learned with his fingers, learned with his hands. And hands, that's what I think of when I think of Caleb. Hands. Hands with an intelligence of their own. Now, it should be apparent that I really enjoyed teaching, and even though I didn't get there in a roundabout way. But I also got my job teaching in Falmouth right here in a very roundabout way. This is a very simple task, says Ann Rice, the keynote speaker. I'd like you to order yourselves and line up in order of your birth dates from January 1st to December 31st. Oh, and the year you're born doesn't matter, just the day and the month. Ann's a big name in gifted and talented education. She's come to this conference. It's an annual summer conference at Bowdoin College for gifted and talented educators. I'm not a teacher yet, but I've gone because I want to find out about this beast called gifted and talented students. Oh, and one more thing. This is a non-verbal exercise. The crowd begins to mumble. No, it's non-verbal. There are over 300 of us in this room. We're sitting at those big round tables where, when the speaker is there, we're sitting there taking notes, or we're eating our meals there. There's probably 30 of these tables. I look at this room and I gotta admit, I'm quite frustrated. Looking at people get up from the tables and trying to figure out how to organize themselves. And I'm thinking, all right, Ann, I get it. I get why we should do this. It's a cool assignment. But if there are 10, 12, 20 people, all right. 300? This is gonna take forever. And without even thinking about it, I just found myself, I climbed up on my chair and then I stood up on the table and I... Within a matter of 3 to 4 minutes, we were lined up according to our birthdays from January 1st to December 31st. Well, cut to 2 years later. I have now just finished my first year teaching. I was up in Guilford, Maine. I was living in Orono, about 45 minutes drive to Guilford. Oh my God, I was having a blast. I was the gifted and talented teacher coordinator for the entire district, K to 12. I could go to any classroom I wanted. It was wonderful. I think the thing that I loved the most was I developed a set of thinking skills that I took to every 3rd and 4th grade classroom. The lessons would alternate. One week they'd be creative problem solving, the next would be critical thinking. But all of the exercises, all the things that we worked on were open-ended. which means there's no right, there's no wrong answer, there's no one way to approach the problem. Well, once the kids realized I was serious about this, my God, the ideas would just fly. It was so much fun. Now, of course it was third and fourth graders, right? So there's a lot of silly stuff. But anybody who's in the field knows that the road to creative solutions is littered with silly ideas. Well, I was having a blast. The kids loved it. The teachers told me that they got to see their students in a new way, and that oftentimes students who were either bored with school or were troublemakers were so engaged in these things they looked like completely different people. Well, it was wonderful. It was a great time. But that spring, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The state of Maine, the budget was in terrible shape. So much so that gifted education, even though it's required by law, they took it off the table for 3 years, so schools could use that money for other purposes. So scores of gifted and talented teachers lost their position. I was one of them. Well, that was one thing, but there were more clouds gathering in my own house. My wife and I have been married for 19 years with 4 children. We're going through divorce. I just turned 40, and oh, by the way, I'd just come out. Midlife crisis? No such thing. Anyway, I've always been a sort of positive person, so I figured it's going to work its way out. So in June, I looked for teaching jobs within 45 minutes of Orono. Nothing opened up. In July, I added Central Maine. Nothing opened. And remember, I'm not the only one looking for these few jobs that are in gifted, talented education. There's all these teachers with experience. Anyway, come August, I had nothing. So I opened up all of the state. I went as far as Saco and Biddeford for interviews. Nothing opened up. Well, one morning, I get a phone call from Paula Hunter. I had met Paula at that conference in Bowdoin 2 years before. She was the teacher here in Falmouth of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade gifted and talented program. And she was moving up into the middle school. And she said, when I think about who I want to have come work with my kids, I can't think of anybody better than the guy who stood on that table. He got all of us, to line up. She said she talked to the committee and told them that they should expect a call from me. So I called for an interview. Well, there are 4 or 5 people at the interview, very bright, lots and lots of questions. I mean, come on, they were weary, right? I mean, I had 1 year of experience teaching. I didn't even have an education degree. I had an art degree, and I had a certificate in gifted and talented education. So, and I found out later that over 90 people had applied for this job. And that most of them had years of experience, some had masters, some had doctorates. And most of them had been screened out before the interview process. Now, I know I would have been screened out if it hadn't been for Paula, right? I know that. But I think what turned the tide was I had a folder I brought of students' work in those creativity lessons. And that just moved everything. I was able to tell them about students like Francis, this 3rd grade boy. Francis always sat in the very, very back of his classroom, all by himself. The teacher, the kids, they always looked back at him like he was kind of dim, maybe even slow, But when it came to creativity, he was the brightest 3rd grade boy in the entire district. Every time I'd have an assignment or an exercise for them to work on, the kids would have all kinds of nice ideas, but boy, when Francis showed an idea, it was brilliant. And he always had more than one. He'd have a solution. He'd stand and go, Mr. Newcomb, I have a solution. And then he would tell with great detail about some solution to this problem. And then he'd say, well, I also have another solution. And then he'd have a completely different solution, often with drawings and graphs and things to show his solution. And the teacher and the kids are looking at this once dim boy as he lights up a room. Well, when the interview was over, they thanked me for a refreshing interview. I left, frankly, not knowing if that was a compliment or not. But a couple weeks later, I was teaching Project Think, the gifted and talented program here in Falmouth. I taught there for 12 years. It was a fantastic opportunity. I really loved it. But who'd have thought that standing on a table in Bowdoin would open up that job? And now for something completely different. In the mid-'80s, I was living in Auburn, and I was working at very best business systems. We printed business forms or business systems. I worked in the art department with 3 other people. I sat at a table across from Jack's. Now, Jack's had I don't know how you'd would say, just a harsh personality. You know, she was always pissed at someone or something. You know, we all know those kind of people, right? Anyway, we had this printer, Steve, nice guy, and he decided he wanted to buy a house for his family. But he knew he didn't have enough money from his salary to have the down payment. So he'd come up with this idea for a part-time business. And I don't remember what it was, but it seemed pretty clever. And so he was going to do that to save the money. Now we had in our break room, we had a payphone in the corner, but the owner of the company had converted it to being a free phone. So oftentimes at break or at lunch, Steve would, you know, he'd scarf his food down and then he'd ask anybody, you know, everybody if they needed to use the phone. And if nobody did, he'd go use it. He'd call the bank to get information. He'd call, you know, places to get parts or whatever he was, you know, ordering. Nobody seemed to be bothered by this. It was great. Except Jax. Every time after break or after lunch, she'd come in the room, who does he think he is? Well, he thinks he's special? He's never going to make enough money. It was just awful. I tried to get her to see things from Steve's point of view, you know, occasionally, but, you know, she wouldn't have it. So finally I did what we all did. We just kind of put her on mute, you know. Well, one day, she doesn't come back into the room from lunch. It's kind of strange. And about 15, 20 minutes pass, and then she comes in the room. Big smile on her face. I don't think I'd ever seen her smile. Turns out she'd gone to see the owner of the company, Mr. Kendall, and she talked to him about Steve's use of the phone. She said, oh, he's abusing the phone, all that privilege you've given us. And Mr. Kendall said, well, what do you think we should do about it? Well, I think you should make it a payphone again. What? Mr. Kendall, luckily for us, was smart enough to send a memo around asking us what we wanted to do. Of course, nothing changed, right? But the fact that she went to him and she had this, she was so proud of that thing. And here's the thing that drives me crazy. It just stuns me. I mean, I don't know what she was getting out of it. And what the phone company, Mr. Kendall, maybe get a couple quarters a week? But what really stuns me is that she was willing to give everyone's freedom away because she either couldn't or didn't want to see the need that other people had for that. Now, is that really that different, though, from what's going on with abortion rights, critical race theory, LGBTQ rights, book banning? People who don't see a need for those things, those rights in their life, are willing to get rid of them for us, everyone else, because they either can't or they don't want to see the need that other people have for it. Oh, it drives me crazy. But I have to admit that maybe I think the way I do in part because of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Do you remember the first time you read Self-Reliance? It had a huge effect on me. And if you've never read it, perhaps after tonight you'll take a little bit of a read. Now, I can't read the whole thing because it's far too long a piece, but I'm going to share some excerpts from it. But I will tell you this, that I have changed some of the nouns and pronouns because it was written in a time that was very sexist in its language. I didn't change any content, just some of the nouns and pronouns. I'd like to believe that if Ralph was with us today, this is what he might have said. I read some lines of verse the other day from an eminent painter. They were original, not conventional. The soul is always admonished by words such as these, no matter what the topic is. It's not the sentiment they instill. It's the sentiment they instill, not the particular words. We must learn to watch this gleam of light which passes across our minds from within. But we take without notice our own thoughts, because, after all, they are our own. And yet in every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. We must learn to recognize these thoughts, this light. Else tomorrow a stranger will say with masterly good sense precisely what we have felt and thought all the while. And we shall be forced with shame to take our own opinion from another. There comes a time in each of our educations where we must arrive at the conviction that envy is ignorance, imitation, suicide. That we must take ourselves, for better or worse, as our own portion, and yet all the while knowing the power that resides in us is new in nature. And no one knows what it is that you or I can become, except for you and I. And we don't even know until we try. Every person is a cause, a country, an age that requires infinite spaces and times and numbers to completely fulfill our design. So why is it then that when we enter into the world, these voices we hear, this light that we see, grows so dim and faint. Society. Society is in conspiracy against every one of its members. Oh, and the virtue society requests most? Conformity. Self-reliance? It's aversion. You know, it's easy in the world to live after the world's opinion. And it's easy in our own solitude to live after our own. But the great ones? The great ones are those who, in the midst of the crowd, keep with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. It is with the exercise of self-trust that new powers shall appear. It's odd to me that society wants so much conformity. The world we live in is not conformed. It's changing. It's daylight, it's nighttime, it's summer, it's winter, it's spring, it's fall, it's high tide, it's low tide, it's winter, it's spring. It's all this stuff. It's changing all the time. The earth we live in, the universe we live in, is a dynamic system, a system of change. Why shouldn't our lives be the same? Well, about 2 years into my retirement, I realized that I had not learned one damn thing. Now, this, and I heard myself say this to myself out loud, this is how you become a crotchety old man, Newcomb. You get set in your ways, you quit learning, you quit growing, you quit changing. Now, look, I live alone, and it was during COVID, so that had an impact. But still, I needed input. And TED Talks and YouTube and Amazon Prime and porn weren't doing it. I needed something new, and I wanted it from real people. I didn't want to do a, online thing. So I set in my heart to look for workshops, classes, something. Now at the time, in my art studio, I was working in steel. I worked for about 10, 12 years in steel, and I was making sculptures and wall pieces. I made these aliens. I had a lot of fun. It was just so much fun. But one day, I'm walking out to my studio, and I realized the joy was gone. That this had devolved into work. And for me, art shouldn't be about work. It should be joyful. So again, that stirred me on to figure out what I needed. So I looked at USM catalog, great courses, but nothing for me. I looked at the Maine College of Art. It only had 2 courses I was interested in, but they were online. Wasn't going to work. Finally, it came via an email from the Cove Street Art Gallery in Portland. They were offering a 2-day workshop called Woodcut Watercolor Printmaking. I had no idea what that was. I looked online and saw something. Oh, that sounds interesting. So I signed up. Oh my God, the 2-day workshop, I had so much fun. I loved every single thing about the process. So much so that when I went home on Monday, I cleaned all of my welding equipment, my welder, my plasma cutter, my compressor. I cleaned everything up. I took pictures of it all. I put it on Craigslist with one price and said, I want to sell this as 1 unit. Within 24 hours, it was gone. The next day, I took all the scrap metal and all the sheets of metal I had, and I donated them to the People's Inclusive Welding in South Portland. And then it took about a week to scrub and clean and paint until I had a beautiful little painting studio. Now, through the years, I've worked in photography, videography, I've worked in found object sculpture, I've worked with steel, I've worked with painting, cartooning, all kinds of things. Right now, it's woodcut watercolor printmaking. And I'm having a blast. And I think the thing that brings me the most joy is that it's so apparent in every piece I make, in every step of the way, that I am but a co-creator. These things, no, not by myself. It is the process, the wood, the paper, it's fantastic. And it's such a great thing to see. And I think that's how our lives should be, that we're co-creators, right? And I think the thing about art in itself that I love is that it keeps me involved in the creative process. A process that asks me to bring my unique self, my otherness, if you will, to the table. And it's a process that requires that I step out of my comfort zone, that I step into the unknown, and that I take a risk. You cannot grow without taking risks. And the greatest risk you can take, I think, is to trust ourselves. As Emerson said, it is with the exercise of self-trust that new powers shall appear. coming after the thing about, the mindlessness and stuff, and why, when it's talking about people doing things mindlessly, like, jacks. And, but the thing is, we've been trained to do that. We've been trained to do thoughtless things. How many of you started your day at school with, I pledge allegiance to the flag, of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all? In the 30 years I taught, almost every day, that's how we started the day. Nothing wrong with the pledge. But most of the kids had no idea what they were saying. They were just standing doing a mindless act. It's kind of like the kid who, he was asked if he knew the name of God, and he says, sure, it's Howard. Howard? What do you mean? Where'd you get that? It's in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven. Howard be thy name. All right, now I know that's silly, right? But here's something kind of embarrassing. When I was a kid, my church and my family, when we said the blessing over food, we started this blessing and said, bless this food to our use and us to thy service. And then it went on. I heard, the first time I heard it, bless this food to our use and less to thy service. It was ridiculous. But every time it was my turn to say the blessing, I stood up and I proudly say, bless this food to our use and less to thy service. I was in the teenagers before I realized how foolish it was. But here's the thing. No one caught it in all those years. Not one adult, no one. Because we were all blind. You just, mindlessly going, And that's the thing with a pledge. How about taking the knee at the national anthem? A lot of people had trouble with this one. If you don't want, I found this on the internet. This gives me the creeps the way it's written. If you don't want to stand for the national anthem, perhaps you should give your legs to a veteran who lost his. That way a real man can stand in your place. Now, besides the sexism that's blatantly hidden in there, or not hidden, but there, it's this whole thing about, you're not a patriot. I mean, Trump tried to punish players if they took the knee because they weren't patriotic. They weren't patriotic. What the hell does football have to do with patriotism? What does the national anthem have to do with sports? Absolutely nothing. It wasn't until 1918 till the national anthem was ever played at a national sporting event. And it was because it was at the 1918 World Series. The government was doing all kinds of big sponsored, patriotic events because we were involved in World War I, and they needed the people to be behind the war. It was a marketing campaign, and yet it still stays here today. It's unbelievable. Did you know, some of you probably remember this, it wasn't until 2009 that the players in football came out for the national anthem. They used to come out afterwards. But in 2009, the Department of Defense paid millions of dollars to NFL teams to come out and stand at the national anthem because the government wanted us to have patriotism, wanted to show that patriotism to the nation. Do we have this chart or not? It might be here. Now, this isn't a conspiracy theory. It's not fake news. Just look. Look online. It's so easy to find all this. The year 2011 to 2014, Department of Defense spent $5.4 million of our taxpayer dollars to 14 NFL teams to hold flag ceremonies. 2013 to 15, National Guard, $6.7 million taxpayer dollars for sports teams to hold flag ceremonies. It's a lot of money to get people to stand up, But here's the thing, it's basically a marketing campaign. People just do it without thinking, they don't question, they just stand and they just do the thing, And if you question things at all, if you have a mind that thinks, you're going to question this sort of stuff. That's all I'm saying. And I'm not questioning sports. I'm not questioning the national anthem. I'm not questioning the pledge. I'm not questioning patriotism. No, I'm questioning people participating in rituals without thought. But I'll say that again. This self-trust thing, it's mystical, I think, stepping into the unknown. Now, Einstein, there's a quote in your program, and he said, if I can say it without looking, I didn't come to my understanding of the fundamental laws of the universe through my rational mind. Then where the hell did he get it from? Life isn't always logical. Sometimes there's magic, there's mystical stuff to it. I told you earlier that I came from a family of alcoholics. It had a profound effect on my life. My dad, oh my God, he As far as I understand, he was always drunk every single day of his life until he died in his mid-60s. My mom, she followed social protocol. She waited until 6 o'clock every night before she polished off a fifth of whiskey on her own every night. Whew, a fifth. When I was drinking, I couldn't do that at all. You know? Well, it got terribly out of hand. And finally, my mom left my father, took my brothers and I, we moved to Florida. Now, my father, as I say, he never stopped drinking, you know. And yet, here's an odd thing. In all those years, he never once gave a penny in child support. He never once visited. He never once gave a gift. And yet, he always found time and money for booze. He literally abandoned his family to alcohol. That's how horrible that disease is. Now, my mom, shortly after we moved to Florida, she found AA. Oh, it was a life changer. She hadn't had a drink since, you know? And I'm proud of her, everything. I love her to death. But I have to be honest. Where she once abandoned us to alcohol, there was a period of a year or two where she abandoned us to her recovery. Now, she had to, for God's sake. She had to if she was going to survive. So I don't blame her, and I'm not complaining, not at all. You know? That's something she had to do. And look, this is not a story about how shitty my parents are or how awful my childhood was. Nah, they were two people trying and coping the best they could. And my mom, she did the best she could to provide a safe and comfortable home for us. And today, she's going to be 101 in 2 weeks. And we have a great relationship. You know, she would do anything for me, I'd do anything for her. It's fantastic. So this isn't a story about lousy parents or lousy childhood. It's a story about abandonment. Because when you're a child, and the adults in your life don't know how to take care of themselves, you're going to be abandoned in some way, shape, form, or another. Now, I have to preface this story by saying, I don't expect all of you, or maybe any of you, to believe this story to be true. But that's all right. It happened to me, and I still doubt it some days. It was an early April morning. I got up around 5 o'clock. I was feeling lousy. I felt invisible for quite some time. That's a sure sign of, symptom of being abandoned. I had been depressed for several weeks, and I just felt, and all I wanted was for the universe to somehow say, hi, Chris, I see you, you're there, I see you, hey. I mean, I didn't expect that, but, I wanted something. And so, I don't know, for some reason I drove out to Scarborough Beach. It's about 6 o'clock when I get out there. And I'm walking up through the dunes on the way to the beach, and I'm thinking, what do I need specifically? What could the universe give me that would make me think, yeah, it sees me? And I thought, you know what I'd like? Is a whole sand dollar. And I don't want to have to look for it or search for it. I just want to find it. Just like miraculously come to me. And so I start running. And I start running down the beach. And at some point, I jump in the air. I spread my legs. I land. And right between my feet. Whoops. Sorry. Right between my feet, I find a perfectly whole white sand dollar. This sand dollar. I should be thrilled, right? I mean, I'd never found a sand dollar whole that way before, and I had asked, but it's a beach. There's sand dollars. So, and then I think to myself, I was really into the yin and yang of life at this point, the opposites and things. I thought, if the universe is really saying something to me, I want a perfectly whole black sand dollar. I didn't know if they existed, but I wanted one. Well, I go running again. And this time I'm running up the beach. And I run and I run and I jump. I spread my legs right between my feet. Is this perfectly whole black sand dollar. And I said, I didn't even know they existed, and I have never seen one since, but I got one that day. Now, I should be smiling, I should be going, hey, life is great, hi universe, you see me, I see you, this is great, right? No. Doubting Thomas that I am, it's a beach. There's sand dollars. It's cool, but... So, I leave the beach. I take these with me, but I leave the beach. A little while later, I'm in Falmouth, and I'm at the grocery store, and I'm buying something, and I'm paying for it with checks. So I write the check, and when I get done, I'm looking for the cap for the pen, and I can't find it anywhere. I look on the conveyor belt, I look on the floor, nothing. I check my pockets, nothing. Well, the pen's no good to me, like that because it's a felt tip pen. And, you know, I can't put it in my pocket like that. It will bleed, right? And you know, it's going to dry out if I don't have a lid on it. So when I walk out the door, I see one of those trash cans that got the dome lid, and I push the thing, I drop the pen in it. I go over to Falmouth Hardware, which is next door, at least it was back then, and I buy something, and when I go in to buy something, I pay this time with cash. And when I look in my pocket, or reach in my pocket for the cash and change, there's the pen cap. Now, I know, we look, but still. Anyway, I found it. Now I'm thinking, okay, I go back outside and I think, you know, it's early morning. There's not gonna be too much trash in there. It might be easy to find this thing. So I go to the thing and I lift the lid up and, oh my God, it is early morning. It's morning trash. It's donuts and cream cheese and hot chocolate and sticky stuff. Oh, it's just disgusting. But right in the top of all of that is this styrofoam cup. And inside of the styrofoam cup is my pen. And the pen that's completely dry. So I reach down and I pull up the cup. And written on the side of that cup, it says, "Hi, Chris." Now, I didn't say the whole cup because it wouldn't fit in my story box, but I say the important part. "Hi, Chris." Holy, now I know that somebody else gave somebody named Chris a coffee cup and probably bought him a cup of coffee and said, "Here," and that Chris threw it in the trash can. But that morning I woke up. I asked the universe to say, "Hi, Chris." I got a white sand dollar, a black sand dollar, I got my pen kept back here, my pen back. I guess I wasn't invisible after all. Yeah. Well, like I said before that story began, I don't expect all of you to believe it. And you know, I still have a hard time believing, and yet I have all that experience, you know? But that's that otherness thing. You know, really it's the less than thing. You know, it just hangs out there. And I think one of the things I've realized is that that less than quality, it sort of creates a sadness that sits outside and hovers around anyone's feeling other. And I think I know why, because we as human beings, we crave to belong. And yet, by definition, if we feel that we don't belong, we feel other, then we feel like we don't belong. And even if we are lucky enough to find someone who gets us, that sadness still lingers and hangs out in the distance, like unwanted clouds on a picnic. And here's the thing about sadness. It's okay to acknowledge it. It's okay to be present with it. But let me tell you something. Sadness can be a cruel emotion because it is self-centered. And as such, it will turn every thought, every memory, every word, every look from another human being. It can turn that into a story where we are the victim. Sadness can create this distorted reality. So yeah, there's sadness associated with being other. But I think one of the things we need to do is to figure out how to deal with that. Now what I've learned to do is fill, the sadness with joy. This void that it creates, I filled it with joyful things that help me just be in the present and be now. And so that brings me to the last story of the evening. A story about how simple, joyful moments fill my soul, and keep the sadness at bay. It was February 2004, 20 years ago. I was living out on Mount Desert Island, and I read in the local paper, back in those days when we looked for things to do in the local paper, I read the paper, and there was an ad that said, experimental band seeks drummer, must have drums, their own drums. Well, I wasn't a drummer. I didn't have my own drums. but I was intrigued. I called the number. I know, what's wrong with me? I do these things, but I called the number. Well, Lori, who answered, was very friendly and stuff, and we talked for a little bit, and then when she found out I wasn't a drummer, I didn't have my own drums, she was pretty darn confused. So I told her, I said, you know, I used to live on Peaks Island, and when I lived on Peaks Island, we had a lot of potlucks, and there were a lot of musicians, and after the dinner, we'd just start playing music. And I played guitar, but not good enough to really, you know, to work with them. But I would go into the kitchen or wherever, and I'd find the found objects. You know, it might be a cup and, you know, a chopstick or something, you know, just to make some noise. You know, it might be a kitchen whisk. You know, whatever, just all kinds of stuff. I mean, even a paper bag, you know, just could make all kinds of good sounds. Anyway, I loved doing this. It was so much fun. It just brought me a great deal of joy. So I told Lori about that. She was okay, but, you know, so big deal. And I said, well, let me tell you an experience that I've had recently, and maybe this will really help you understand why I think this is a good idea. It had been about 2 or 3 weeks prior to that. It was January, and we had had an incredibly cold January that year. We had been below zero, like 10, 15 degrees below zero for almost 2 weeks. Well, this was a Sunday, and all of a sudden it was 35, 40 degrees. Boy, it was wonderful. Blue skies, white little puffy clouds. It was a beautiful day in Maine, you know, on Mount Desert Island. So I went out to Jordan Pond, and I'm standing there at the pond, looking out where the bubbles, you know, the mountains surrounded on three sides. If you haven't been there, it's just gorgeous. But I'm standing at the outlet where the water from the pond goes into the stream. Now the pond is solid ice and has about a foot of snow on top of it. It's just gorgeous. But suddenly, I hear this sound. And this is the best I can share with you what that sound was. So I'm looking at this and listening, and all of a sudden, it sounded like a whale. What I thought a whale sounded like. But it was coming from under the pond. There couldn't be a whale, there couldn't be anything. What the hell was going on? It started again. It was so awesome, and finally it dawned on me. It was the water and the air under the ice as it moved towards the outlet, making this incredible sound. And probably the fact that everything was warming up so fast had something to do with it. Well, I headed east along the pond, and I went up on this trail, and I found a big rock to sit on, and I brushed the snow off it, and I sat down. I pulled out a thermos of herbal tea that I had, and I'm sitting there drinking my tea, and I'm looking through the pine trees out over the pond, and every now and then I'd hear, and that was echoing off the hills from where I was. It was really wonderful. And then, this murder of crows appears. And I love crows. I know people hate crows. A lot of them do. They hate them. I love crows. I love the sound they make. I love the look of them. It's like I'm listening to this symphony that the earth is making. It's fantastic. And then, what? Sounded like a xylophone. What is going on? And suddenly it's going faster and then faster, and suddenly it's coming from all around me. And I realized that the pine trees had thawed out so quickly from being 10, 20, 15 degrees below zero, and now being 40 degrees, they were expanding, and they were making this fantastic sound. It was unbelievable. It was just... So I closed my eyes for about 10, 15 minutes, and I just listened. It was one of the coolest things I ever experienced. And then the next sound was... I thought it was a chainsaw, but no, it was an it was a snowmobile, which I'm not against snowmobiles, but it was a snowmobile, and it was pulling out its ice shack. And then another one came, and a third one came, and all right, I got up, and I headed back to my car. When I got to the parking lot, there was a guy there, and he was just getting ready to hook his ice shack up to his snowmobile, and I said, what's going on? He said, well, this is the first day that we can come out and enjoy this, bring our snowmobiles out and do all this. We have about a 6-week window where we can be here. So I'm driving home, and I'm thinking, God, I'm so lucky. I may have been the only person that got to hear that symphony, and nobody's going to hear it now for a while. So when I told Lori that, I said, you guys call yourself an experimental band. Maybe you should have an experimental percussionist. All I like to do is do what nature does. You know, just use what's around me and make noise. And she said, well, I can't speak for the rest of the band, but tell you what, why don't you come to our rehearsal? We rehearse every Wednesday. So that Wednesday I went out to Bass Harbor. It was a cold night. And I arrive at this, what looks like a regular garage, but when I come around the side, it's longer than this. It's huge, it's really long. And I can hear that the band is in, they're already rehearsing. So there's a little side door, and I open the side door, and I walk in, and there, I'm gonna say it's longer than this, but there is this aluminum mast for a huge boat. And it turns out the guy that owns this garage, that's what he did, he made these masts. And way down at the end is the band. And they've already started playing, so I take my little bag of tricks of sticks and stones and stuff, and down I go. And they're already playing, they don't stop, so I just pull my stuff out and I just start joining in. Well, about 3 minutes later, the song ends. Gloria introduces me. A few words are chatted, but not much. And then we start another song, and we play. And then we do another song. And about an hour and a half goes by. Not really any words, just playing. Well, we end. Everybody starts putting their instruments away. Nobody says anything, so I get my stuff and I put it in my little bag and thanks, see ya. And I head down and I go all the way up past that mast and I get all the way to the end and I'm going out the door and all of a sudden Lori says, see you next Wednesday? And that was it. I was in the band. And let me tell you, we had so much fun. It was just so joyful to do that, you know. And when we played out, we didn't play out a lot, but when we did, now it took audiences a while to get used to us and figure out what we were up to. But once they did, oh my God, they had such a good time. Of course, they never had as much fun as we did, but they had a really good time. So, yeah, I've learned to keep this sadness at bay by trying to find those things that bring me joy, you know. And it's dance, and it's art, and it's music, and it's family, and friends, and it's, you know, storytelling, it's all those things. You know, I'm sure you know the story about the traveler who asked the old mayor, you know, how to get to Farmington. And the mayor says, you know, you just can't get there from here. You know, we love that story, right? And anytime somebody comes to visit us and never been to Maine, that's the first story we tell them. You know? But here's the thing, I think we can get there from here. I think we just have to trust ourselves to take the risks that are ours to take and to learn to embrace our otherness as a gift and not a liability. And maybe, just maybe, avoid the Ellen Stouts and the Jacksons of this world. Thank you guys for coming out tonight.